It's a pleasure to be here to talk about a subject which is very close to my heart. And I must thank Mr. Mamin and his team at Lundbeck for the privilege and the opportunity. But most of all, sir, I must tell you that it's an honor to share the stage with you, Mr. Prasanna, because you were an icon for us when we were schoolboys. It's the first time that I have the pleasure of meeting you, but I can only remember with great pride and humility the cheer that you brought to us and to India during our school days. Thank you for the privilege. India is an aging country. At the time of independence, our life expectancy was about 32 years of age. Today, with advances in healthcare, nutrition, public awareness, it's close to 70. And what is interesting is that the women live longer than the men. And as we grow older, we would find that the proportion of the aging, which arbitrarily is defined as over 60, which is just a rank which I have just achieved, is growing. In the last census, it was more than 10% of the total population. And in certain parts of the country, like Kerala, where the health indices are better, it is more than 13% of the population. So you can imagine how big a problem this is going to be, especially because of the fact that the support systems that we have in this country are not adequate to meet the challenge. What is even more tragic is the fact that what I consider the greatest contribution of Hindu society to the world, of that being of a joint family system, is breaking down, and we have nuclear families, smaller number of children, husband and wife working in urban centers, with aging parents being left to fend for themselves, and that itself is a tragedy. In states like Kerala, we have a different perspective to this problem. We have most of the working population living outside the state. And so you have aging parents living in huge palatial buildings, sipping scotch, wondering what to do with their time, and being desperate from loneliness. And in Kerala, the women outnumber the men. And that is something unique in the demography of that state. And so you are going to have in the future an increasing problem of aging widows. This is the social perspective of the problem that we are going to face in the not so immediate future. Aging is a process that begins at the time of your birth. It is like a clock that starts ticking and moves relentlessly towards the moment of your passing. There is no turning back. And as someone said, every moment of life is showtime, folks. There is no dress rehearsal. This is going to be the problem that is going to face each one of us. As I mentioned once in a talk like this, I found a large number of people who were young, and I told them that probably you think that what I'm going to talk is through my hat and it doesn't concern you. But I can guarantee that in a few years' time, you would all be confronted with the same problem. But what really matters is that there are many aspects to this process of aging. There is a health aspect and there is an economic aspect. And I will not touch on any of these two because that is not what I wanted to talk to you about. What I really wanted to touch is on the emotional aspects of aging. And that to me is the greatest challenge that you are going to be confronted with as you grow older. Because what really matters is not how old you are in years, but how old you think you are. Somebody mentioned that you can remain young as long as you are young at heart, although you may be slightly older in other places. And so what really determines your attitude is the way you look at the process of growing old. And if you insist that you are going to remain young, you can remain young throughout your life. We just had the privilege of celebrating my father's 95th birthday a couple of months ago. And he said that he has made an application for an extension of about 15 years. And he's very optimistic that he's going to get a positive reply. And he, for me, is an icon because of the way he has handled life. I lost my mother 13 years ago, but he still keeps going. I'm an only son. He refuses to stay with us because he fiercely wants his independence and lives with a great deal of grace and dignity. Winston Churchill was another icon who many of you would remember. On his 90th birthday, he had a press conference. And somebody in the press asked him, "So will we have the privilege of seeing you on your 100th birthday?" And he looked up this young man up and down, and he said, "Why not, young man? You look quite healthy." There was another famous story of a very famous American comedian called George Burns, who lived up to 102. On his 100th birthday, he was interviewed by the TV people, and one young lady asked him, "Sir, what is your opinion about women?" And he thought for a moment and he said, "I don't think I can give you an honest reply. I stopped thinking about them 2 years ago." So what really matters is not how old you are, but how old you think you are. And what I must ask you to remember is that today is the first day of the rest of your life. So make it count and start today. Because whether you like it or not, you're going to have to live through that phase. And it is the attitude that you bring to this phase of your life that is going to determine the self-esteem and the dignity with which Mr. Prasanna was talking about, and the dignity with which you are going to live. Retirement is one of the most traumatic periods of life. For people who have served in very high government positions, who have held positions of power, suddenly to step down from all that power is something that can be quite humiliating. And if you are not prepared for it, this is something that can devastate you, because you die emotionally first, and that is the beginning of physical death. I know many number of people who have retired without making plans for retirement, and then found that they had nothing to do. There was too much free time on their hands, and then suddenly it hits you what the real meaning of, it was the old idiom which we learned in school, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. I used to think when I was a schoolboy that meant evil thoughts or obscene thinking. As you grow older, you begin to realize that it is negative thinking. And it is this negativity that grows on you if you have too much time on your hands. And so it is all the more important that you utilize this time usefully. And what do you mean by usefully? It should have some emotional gratification for you. It must make you feel worthwhile. It must make you feel that you are contributing to yourself, your family, and to society. This is not the time when you work to make ends meet. This is the time when you are doing chicken soup for the soul. So the most important thing is to find things to do. And if you ask me, what is it that you do? I keep counseling elderly people very often. And I said, what is the area of your expertise? And they say, it's engineering, or you're a teacher, or you were a civil servant, or you were a literature professor. I said, whatever it is, that experience and that knowledge doesn't die away with age. On the contrary, you have acquired a great deal of wisdom, which not the younger people have. And it is time for you to dispense that wisdom, to impart that wisdom, because that, unfortunately, is a commodity in short supply. You can go into other fields, take up something new, learn a new trade, take up a new hobby, a passion which you always had but never had the time to do. I'm a practicing doctor, a neurologist, and I love my job, and I always wanted to be a doctor. But if I had a chance all over again, perhaps I would end up teaching history or literature or economics, things which are other subjects which are close to my heart. And so you would spend time doing that. And I always tell people that if you are in one particular field for so many years, even a jackass would acquire adequate knowledge to do a profession successfully. But the trick is to be able to master other trades. And to me, the greatest icon was Nani Palkhiwala. I recently had a chance to read a biography by Mr. M.V. Kamath, and it just amazes you at the width of interests of that man. He came from a very poor Parsi family, and he had a terrible stutter when he was a schoolboy. Later on, he said once that when I became a lawyer, I realized that I had as much chance of succeeding as a lawyer as a blind man would have to climb the Matterhorn. And you can imagine what amazing odds he overcame in the process of becoming the person he was. And what wasn't he? He started as an income tax lawyer, wrote a book which after 70 years is still the iconic book about the Income Tax Act. And he wrote that when he was 29. He became a constitutional expert and the greatest lawyer that India has ever produced. He was a writer, a diplomat, a speaker par excellence. There was a time when he started discussing the budget. It started as a small group in a hotel in Bombay, and it went over the years and his fame spread. And towards the end, they had to hire the Braben Stadium to accommodate the more than 100,000 people who came to listen to this man talk about the budget. And through all this achievement, he retained a dignity and a humility which was touching. And so you have people like that who can be icons to you at whatever stage of life. And so you need to get into some field which will give you an emotional high. Start something new. Do something different. Do something that counts. And that will make it all worthwhile. Robert Frost put it beautifully. I shall be saying this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So try it. It's worth your while. Children can be a joy and a heartbreak. We have all brought up children, and you know all the travails, the tribulations, and also the joys associated with it. I had a friend, a very close friend, who I share many, many moments with, and he rings me up every day and shares a joke, and that makes my day. And during the time when he was bringing up his children in their teens, he used to have to tear his hair up every day because of all the problems that he was facing. And he rang me up and said, Mathew, I am convinced that insanity is an inherited condition. You can get it from your children. And I thought it couldn't have been put better than that. But what is worth remembering is that we were also children once. And if you look back, you would find and think about many of the mischief that you were put into. Many times when your teachers, your parents thought that this was the end of the road there, you don't have a future, like his father told Mr. Prasanna. And then yet, we did turn out to be reasonably decent people. So the trick about all this, as far as your children is concerned, is to be able to still give them a chance. Give them a long rope, and as long as they don't go and hang themselves with it, you will find that they achieve a potential which can sometimes surprise you. Because at the end of the day, you will realize that it is not your wealth and it is not your property that you pass on. There are only two things you can give your children. One is roots, and the other is wings. So when it is time to fly, let them fly. Don't hold them back. And one of the most important things to remember in dealing with children is the fact that you need not get emotionally involved with every little problem of theirs. It would constitute interference, and they would probably resent it, just as we would in those times when we thought our parents were getting involved with everything we did. We must give them enough space. We must give them enough latitude to be able to make the mistakes that they need to make to realize what life is all about. Because every generation has to make its own mistakes. Every generation has to also grab its own opportunities and make the best of them. And when it is time for you to pass on, it is very important for you to write a will. And in the will, you need to make sure that it is your spouse who has the authority to execute the will. The reason for this particular thing is that in most cases, we men would outlive our spouses. Or the spouses would outlive us, And it is a very tragic situation in which our widowed spouses would be left at the mercy of children who are fighting between themselves. And more often than not, it is about money and property. And so it is very important that you need to give the authority to execute the way you want your property distributed to your spouse, so that she has got enough dignity and is treated with the dignity that she deserves by the children. And having command over the execution of the will ensures that to a great extent. Because ensuring the dignity of your spouse and her self-esteem is a very, very important thing in your scheme of affairs. So think about it. And you can write a will in any which way you want. Just an ordinary will written on a piece of paper is still valid. I'll give you an example, but this is not necessarily one that you should follow. So somebody who wrote a will said that I leave my entire property to my dear wife Myrtle, provided she gets married immediately after my death. So that there is at least one person in this whole universe who acutely regrets my early demise. Anyway, that's one way of writing a will, but you can think of another. But don't forget to do it. The company of friends is something that can be dear to you, very close to you. And especially in these times of nuclear families and small families, with children living away from parents, it's important that you have a group of people whom you vibe with. And they, I'm sure, will be the source of support that you will treasure as you grow older. And there are many ways that you can do this. You can achieve it by networking professionally. You can do this by staying close to friends and family who vibe with you. You can take part in activities of common interest which are dear to your heart, and so you have a common goal to achieve. And in the process, get involved in as many activities as you can and develop a wide network of friends. Because it is your friends who will eventually be of greater support to you. We ourselves realized long ago that our children would not be with us. And so we decided to do something that was at that time quite unique. We formed a small group of people, very close friends and very close relatives, whom we could get along with, and formed a small colony. We built a gated colony of 9 houses. And the greatest pleasure that we had as we built it, we never thought we would ever be able to achieve it because it was being done for the first time, and we were not people in construction. But we had an architect friend who chipped in and designed the whole place for us. One of my brothers-in-law is a project executive, and he did the whole layout and the execution of the work. And eventually, even to our great surprise, it worked out. And the greatest pleasure that we had as our children were growing up was that when they came home on weekends, you would have to go looking for them in the various houses because we didn't know which house they were in. And recently, 4 years ago, when we lost a very dear sister-in-law, that is when we realized what support really means. When there is a tragedy, to have a group of people to take care of everything, physical and emotional, is what makes all the difference. So it is worth your while to develop that group of friends, sustain that friendship, because it is something that you will treasure throughout your life. And you will remember each one of them for all the great things that they meant to you. A poet put it very beautifully. I shall be saying this with a sigh, somewhere ages... Sorry. When I have fears as Keats had fears, of the moment I will cease to be, I console myself with the vanished years, remembered laughter, remembered tears, the peace of the changing sea, and remembered friends who are dead and gone. How happy they were, I do not know, but happy am I who loved them so. So please remember to develop that group of friends and make it count. One of the greatest problems that you're going to have as you grow older is a phenomenon which I call anticipatory anxiety. The mind is a very funny organ. It doesn't remember joys, but never forgets a negative. So as you grow older, your whole mindset changes to become one of being more insecure, being more anxious. And the anxiety is not necessarily about your death or your life or your quality of life. Because more often than not, we have made more than enough provision for our basic material needs. What is it that I am terrified of? I'm not afraid of dying. That can happen to any one of us anytime. And the greatest blessing is not to know when you are going to die. The greatest blessing is not to know what is going to happen tomorrow. The tragedy of the mind is that it is forever worrying about what is going to happen tomorrow. And then it looks at it from a perspective that as we grow older becomes increasingly negative. So if I'm supposed to face a problem tomorrow, I worry what will happen in case it doesn't work out. And the mind is a funny organ in the sense that it does not react according to reality. It responds according to perception. So I perceive a negative outcome for tomorrow. I assume that it is going to be a negative outcome, and I react as though a negative outcome has already occurred, despite the fact that I have not yet faced the problem. Tomorrow comes and the problem comes, and more often than not, I'm able to solve it reasonably well. But the success of that solution doesn't register in my mind. And I worry about the next day's problem. And so it goes on, so that what you are really doing in your mind is forever crisis management. You are just lurching from one crisis to another. And all these crises, more often than not, are perceived crises. They're not real crises. And all the joys that you have in between, the mind doesn't register. So you are living in a state of perpetual anxiety, wondering what the morrow will bring. And it is that you need to change. Because it is not really that way. Today is available to us. tomorrow is not guaranteed. A cardiologist friend of mine puts it very beautifully. Your next heartbeat is a bonus beat, which is absolutely true. So why worry about the next heartbeat? Take care of the one that you have and live to the best of your ability. Live to the extent of your dignity and make it count. Because in the end, you have to realize that the strengths that you need to acquire in order to face the future, especially at this phase of life, has to come from within. You may have a very supportive spouse. You may have wonderful children who are always willing to help and support. You may have friends who are always there to help you when you need. But at the end of the day, that last bit in any problem is the strength that you can find within. And it is in that sense that you need to acquire the sense of the strength in different ways, in different fields, to be able to sustain an interest in life. Because otherwise, life becomes mechanical, it becomes boring, and it becomes a source of desperation and despair and depression, which is the greatest problem that we have today. Depression to me, when I'm dealing with older people, is an epidemic. And the reason for that is the fact that people do not know what to do with their time. We have this problem of children being in the United States and grandparents coming and saying that, "Doctor, I'm going away to take care of my grandchildren. I'll be back after 6 months." And as beautifully as it can ever get. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on, accept the will that says to them, hold on. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you will be a man, my son. Can't be better put than that. So think about it, because you have to derive the strength from within. And you need to acquire every new aspect of living well to be able to cope with the setbacks, which are natural to any phase of life, and especially so at this phase. It's very important to develop a sense of humor. You must be able to laugh at the world. If you can laugh, then that is a great sense of relaxation. It's a great stress reliever. I've always admired people who can pull off self-deprecatory humor, where they themselves are the target of the joke. In my younger days, I used to think, what is the point? This guy is making a joke of himself. It's ridiculous. As you grow older, you realize that anybody who can make a joke at his own expense is a phenomenally strong person, because he doesn't bother about what the world thinks of him. And if you can laugh at yourself, you can laugh at the world. And you come across people who are so spontaneously humorous, who defuse situations and are able to make the best of everything without there being any rancor or angularity. One of the greatest examples I have met is the chief bishop of the Marthoma Church. Some of you would have heard about him. He's called Bishop Chrysostom, Archbishop Chrysostom. He's 95 years of age. There's nothing that is not wrong with him. He's got Parkinson's disease, heart disease, cancer, you name it, everything. Razor sharp mind still. And he uses it to devastating effect. I got introduced to him for the first time a couple of years ago when he came visiting my neighbor who was a cousin of his. And he said, "Doctor, you are a neurologist." I said, "Yes, Your Grace. You must be having a very poor practice." So I was stunned the first time I'm meeting him. Why is he talking to me like this? There are very few people with brains, And then he went, my mother-in-law, she was sick at that time, and both of them exchanged. He was tottering with his stick, and he came and sat next to her. And he inquired about her health. And eventually he asked her, are you able to sleep well? And he says, Tirumeni, it's very difficult to sleep these days because of all my problems. You come to church, nice place to sleep. You can't help loving people like that. So develop a sense of humor, be able to laugh at yourself, and you can laugh at the world. Prayer is a great source of strength. For many of us, it probably constitutes the main pillar of what is our day, emotionally, I mean. And it does not matter how you pray. Because to me, prayer is an influence. Just like any other influence that you may be exposed to. We put it up on a pedestal because of its, in inverted commas, holy status. But nevertheless, it is just another influence. Like your work, or music, or literature, or gardening, or going out and helping somebody. So if your mind is positive, you are receptive to positive influences. And prayer can be a greatly positive influence in that time. The difference between faith and religion. We're all brought up culturally to think that these are the same. And many of our religious preachers would like to believe us to believe that it is the same. But please remember that your religion is an accident of history and nothing more. Your faith is something totally different. Your faith is your strength. To me, your faith is your self-confidence. And when I say that, what is my definition of self-confidence? It is not arrogance. It is not wearing your great faith on your shoulder. It is the awareness that you are doing the best you can under a certain set of circumstances. Because if all circumstances were favorable, any idiot can perform. And if all circumstances are unfavorable, it's very easy to make that decision. We won't go into it. But most of life's choices are not like that. You do it this way, and these are the pros and those are the cons. You do a diametrically opposite decision, and these are the pros and those are the cons. And now you choose in real time. A postmortem tomorrow will tell you whether you made the right decision or not. So you need to know that this is your self-confidence. How do you decide? You decide on the basis of your knowledge, on the basis of your experience, on the basis of advice which you may get from friends and well-wishers, from the support of your family, from the mistakes that you have made in the past. But at the end of the day, that last bit of any decision is your faith. It is a leap of faith. And as you get older and as you get more experienced, the chances of making a mistake become less. But there still is a margin for error. After 30 years as a neurologist, I still kick myself now and then to realize how stupid I was not to have thought of something which should have been there. And in my case, it means life and death sometimes. And I still, if I get cynical and I say, doesn't matter, I won't learn. But I try to learn so that I hopefully will not make that mistake again. And so you would think that prayer is something that to me is once more an influence. So, and it doesn't matter how you pray. You may do arti in the temple, or you may pray at church, or like the Jews, you may sway in front of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. If you go to Nepal, you will find them turning a prayer wheel. It is all the same because fundamentally you're opening your mind to a positive influence. So whether you're Hindu or Muslim, Sikh or Christian, Jew or Gentile, it just doesn't matter. And true faith transcends all religions. I'm reminded of a story of a very famous Westerner who came to India and studied Carnatic music for years. And in one of them, his name was Higgins, and he was known as Higgins Bagodar. You would all know. Yes. And he came to a temple in Karnataka. And as he was about to enter the temple, the priest came and told him, he recognized him from his white skin and said, "I'm sorry, you can't go in because you're not a Hindu." He didn't say anything. He just went outside, sat next to the gate of the temple, and started singing Krishna Ni Begane Balo so beautifully and so emotionally that the priest came out, touched his feet, and he said, "You are more than a Hindu, please come in." So true faith transcends all man-made boundaries of religion. And it is worth your while to remember that, because as you think about the prayers that you learnt in your childhood, you would think that probably those prayers were exclusively tailor-made for this phase of life. And I quote from the favorite hymn of the Mahatma: "Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens, Lord with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh abide with me. Swift to its close ebbs out life's little day, earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see, O thou who changes not, abide with me." So prayer can be a source of tremendous strength. And as Tennyson put it, more things are wrought by prayer than the world dreams of. And then there is death. And I'm not talking about your own death. That is not for you to determine. It is about the death of friends, of parents, of dear brothers, sisters, for a soldier, a comrade in arms. People who are so close to you that their passing can be devastating. Unfortunately, this is something that is a reality in this phase of life. And the worst thing would be to lose your children, or even worse than that, probably your grandchildren. Because then you grieve not just for your son or daughter, you grieve for yourself too. And that is what makes something very, very tragic and emotionally terrible. But you must remember that death is also part of life. And just like we are born and live a happy or whatsoever life you have, death is one stage of that. And it is important that you remember to be prepared for it. The death of friends, parents, brothers, even children. And be able to face it with a degree of equanimity that doesn't push you down. I lost a sister and two nieces in a tragedy which, after 20 years, we have still not come to terms with. She was with us for 6 weeks, and we saw her off at the airport. She went to her house, and an hour and a half after she entered her house, a 12-story building just toppled over, killing her and both her children. And we thought, more than anybody else, my father would not survive that tragedy because he was so emotionally close to her. I still remember him rolling with grief. It took him about 2 or 3 years before he could come to terms with it. There were many times during that phase in which we would come in, he would be alone, he would be watching a video of my sister's wedding and weeping. The moment he saw us, of course, everything would change. But that was how close he felt, and I'm sure anybody who has lost close people would feel the same. But at the end of it, the way he reconciled, and one of the reasons why he is so much of an icon to me, is the fact that he said, there is nothing that we could have done which would have prevented the tragedy. So we just take it as fate and move on. Because unless you do that, you would not be able to live. You would just drown yourself in sorrow and depression. And finally, there is your own death. Many of us think about it. Many of us would like not to think about it. I do not know whether you know about Winston Churchill once more. He planned his entire funeral. Every band which would play, every tune that would be played, every regiment that would take part, where it would be represented and so on, right down to the last detail. And then he titled this whole thing Operation Hope Not. So while we would like to think that we are going to be eternal, the fact remains that we need to face up to the fact that you are going to pass on. And the implication of it is to be able to do it with grace and dignity and to accept it as part of living. Because if you are able to sustain your emotions and sustain your strength and sustain your self-esteem, then when it is your time, you should be able to look yourself in a mirror and look back at life and think that I have fought the best I could ever do. And that is good. And it is the awareness that you have put in the best that you could that gives you the joy of having lived a good life. I'm reminded in conclusion about Robert Louis Stevenson. He was a very famous writer, Scottish writer. Many of you would have read his books in your childhood, Kidnapped, Treasure Island, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And he achieved worldwide fame when he was very young. But he was always frail of health, and the Scottish climate and the English climate didn't suit him. So he traveled all over the world to try to find a place which would be okay with his constitution. He found that place in a South Pacific island of Samoa, of West Samoa. And there he lived with the tribals, and he integrated himself into their society and became a very respected member of their clan. They called him Tusitala, the teller of tales. And when he died at the very young age of 44, the tribal chiefs carried his coffin to a hill which overlooked the South Pacific, and he was buried there. And on his grave are the words from his own writings, Requiem, words that reflect the strength that he had found within himself, in the group of people he interacted with, and in his God. The most famous epitaph in the English language. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live and gladly die. And I laid me down with a will. This be the verse ye shall grave for me. Here lies he where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter, home from the hill. I wish you all a very, very great joy and peace in the autumn of your years, and may you have roses in December. Thank you.